Satellite imagery captured in August 2025 reveals a quiet but consequential shift in the South China Sea. Vietnamese dredgers are carving artificial land out of shallow coral reefs across the Spratly Islands. Since early 2025, Vietnam has expanded 8 previously untouched features, creating more than 930 hectares of reclaimed land. That figure already represents roughly 70% of the total area China constructed during its massive island building campaign between 2013 and 2017. At this pace, Vietnam is on track to equal or even surpass China's total reclaimed territory in the Spratlys within just a few years. What makes this development truly striking is not only the scale, but the response it has received. Or rather, the lack of one. Beijing, which has aggressively confronted the Philippines over far smaller construction projects, has remained conspicuously silent. There have been no Coast Guard confrontations, no naval intimidation, and no meaningful diplomatic escalation. This silence is not accidental. It reflects a deeper strategic calculation unfolding beneath the surface. The Spratly Islands sit at the heart of one of the most contested waterways on the planet. Every year, an estimated $3.4 trillion worth of trade passes through the South China Sea, accounting for roughly 21% of global maritime commerce. Beneath the seabed lie vast energy resources, including approximately 11 billion barrels of oil and more than 5 trillion cubic meters of natural gas. Control over these waters is not determined solely by treaties or court rulings. It is shaped by geography, both natural and artificial. Whoever occupies reefs, rocks, and low tide elevations can transform them into logistical hubs, surveillance platforms, and military outposts. From there, power can be projected outward across the region. China recognized this early and constructed 7 heavily fortified artificial islands equipped with runways, ports, radar systems, and missile batteries. That advantage, however, is no longer uncontested. Over the past several years, Vietnam has systematically upgraded 21 of the 29 features it controls in the Spratly Islands. What were once minimal concrete outposts have been transformed into artificial islands capable of supporting sustained naval operations. Hanoi's reclamation campaign signals a belief that control of the South China Sea will ultimately be decided by physical presence rather than diplomatic protest. Vietnam's strategic dilemma begins with distance. While Chinese vessels can operate close to their artificial islands with minimal transit time, Vietnamese ships historically had to travel hundreds of kilometers from the mainland to reach contested waters. This imbalance made sustained patrols inefficient and vulnerable. Artificial islands changed that equation by bringing logistics, resupply, and command infrastructure directly into the disputed zone. For years, Vietnam relied on modest construction methods, reinforcing reefs with small concrete structures and basic facilities. That approach shifted decisively in October 2021, when Hanoi deployed industrial cutter suction dredgers for the first time. These machines operate on an entirely different scale, capable of relocating massive volumes of sediment in a short time. The results are visible from space. Reefs and lagoons that once held isolated structures now support expanded landmasses, ports, helipads, and fortified compounds. Sandbars stretch for kilometers where open water once existed. Bark, Canada. Reef, a 29-kilometer-wide atoll in the southern Spratlys, now hosts approximately 2.8 square kilometers of reclaimed land, making it the largest Vietnamese-controlled feature in the island chain. At Bark, Canada, construction crews have laid the groundwork for a runway measuring roughly 2,400 meters in length. Such a strip would be capable of supporting large transport aircraft, maritime patrol planes, and potentially long-range strike platforms. If completed, it would become Vietnam's second operational airstrip in the Spratlys, alongside the existing 1,200-meter runway on Trong Sa Island. Elsewhere, similar transformations are underway. Pearson Reef has been expanded to nearly 1.3 square kilometers, with a long sandbar linking fortified structures. Tennant Reef now spans roughly 0.7 square kilometers, with reclaimed land extending far enough to support a future runway. Lad Reef, South Reef, and other sites follow the same pattern, dredging lagoons, piling sediment, and reinforcing the perimeter with infrastructure. By May 2025, all 21 Vietnamese-controlled features in the Spratlys had undergone significant artificial expansion. Just 4 years earlier, more than half of these locations consisted of little more than reinforced pillboxes perched on submerged rocks. The shift marks a fundamental change in Vietnam's posture from symbolic presence to permanent occupation. The infrastructure emerging across these reefs is unmistakably military in nature. Most sites feature at least one hardened munitions depot encased in thick blast walls. Bark Canada Reef alone appears to contain 3 such facilities. Satellite imagery also shows standardized building clusters arranged around central courtyards, facing outward toward the sea. While their precise function cannot be confirmed, their layout is consistent with barracks, command centers, or operational hubs. Helipads have appeared at multiple sites, including Tennant Reef, Discovery Great Reef, Lad Reef, and South Reef. Additional reinforced positions, likely intended for coastal artillery or missile systems, have been constructed on several features. Notably, however, most reefs lack full-length runways despite being long enough to support them. This appears to be a deliberate choice. On reefs such as Pearson, Tennant, Lad, and South Reef, the placement of munitions depots and structures effectively prevents runway construction. This suggests that Vietnam's priority lies not in air dominance, but in naval logistics and sustained surface presence. The focus is on ports rather than airfields. At least 8 reefs now feature expanded harbors capable of servicing large vessels, including Vietnam's Gepard-class frigates. These ports allow ships to refuel, resupply, and rotate crews without returning to the mainland. The effect is a dramatic extension of Vietnam's operational reach and endurance in contested waters. In essence, Hanoi is replicating China's strategy on a smaller scale. Artificial islands function as forward operating bases, enabling a constant presence rather than intermittent patrols. According to the Asia Maritime Transparency Initiative, Vietnamese dredgers have created more than 930 hectares of new land across 14 features since October 2021 alone. If the current pace continues, Vietnam will rival China's total reclamation effort within 2 years. Yet despite the scale of this transformation, Beijing's response remains restrained. That restraint raises questions which cannot be answered by construction statistics alone. To understand China's silence, it is necessary to look beyond dredges and sandbars to the broader strategic environment shaping decisions in the South China Sea. China's muted reaction to Vietnam's island-building campaign stands in sharp contrast to its behavior elsewhere in the South China Sea. For years, Beijing has taken an increasingly aggressive posture toward the Philippines. Chinese Coast Guard vessels have rammed Filipino ships, used high-pressure water cannons to damage hulls, and even deployed bladed weapons during boarding actions near disputed reefs. In several incidents, sailors were injured and ships were forced to retreat. In 2024 alone, confrontations escalated to the point where Chinese vessels deliberately collided with one another while chasing Philippine boats, causing severe damage. Hundreds of maritime militia ships have been deployed to swarm Filipino-held features, while Beijing has openly threatened Manila with military consequences if it continues construction or resupply operations. All of this occurred while the Philippines controls just 9 land features in the Spratly Islands. Vietnam, by contrast, controls more than twice that number and is now reshaping them at a scale comparable to China's own reclamation campaign. Yet Beijing's response has been limited to formulaic statements reiterating sovereignty claims and vague warnings about necessary measures. Those measures, so far, have not materialized. This disparity is not accidental. Several strategic factors help explain why China is tolerating Vietnam's expansion while punishing the Philippines. The first is geopolitical bandwidth. Beijing is already locked into a confrontation with Manila, which has rapidly deepened its security ties with the United States. Under President Ferdinand Marcos Jr., the Philippines has opened additional military bases to U.S. forces, expanded joint exercises, and strengthened defense cooperation with Japan, Australia, India, and South Korea. From Beijing's perspective, the Philippines is no longer acting independently. It is viewed as a forward extension of U.S. strategy in the region. Vietnam, however, occupies a different category. Opening a second front against Hanoi risks pushing Southeast Asian states toward a unified position against China, something Beijing has historically worked hard to avoid. The second factor is history. Vietnam's presence in the Spratly Islands is not new. Hanoi began expanding its footprint as early as the 1970s and consolidated control over 21 features between 1975 and 1996. Some of these were taken directly from China. In 1988, tensions erupted into violence at Johnson South Reef, where Chinese naval forces sank 3 Vietnamese transport ships and killed 64 sailors. From Beijing's perspective, Vietnam's current construction boom represents escalation in scale, not a sudden shift in behavior. The Philippines, on the other hand, only recently began openly resisting Chinese pressure, making its actions appear more defiant and politically charged. The third and perhaps most important factor is Vietnam's strategic ambiguity. Unlike Manila, Hanoi has carefully avoided aligning itself too closely with Washington. Vietnam maintains partner status within BRICS, a bloc often framed as a counterweight to Western influence. President Lam reinforced this posture by attending China's Victory Day celebrations in Beijing in September 2025. At the same time, Vietnam continues to maintain deep military ties with Russia. In late 2025, investigative reporting revealed that Hanoi had finalized an $8 billion arms agreement with Moscow. The deal reportedly includes up to 40 Su-35 fighter jets, with payments structured through energy transactions to bypass Western sanctions. This positions Vietnam as a country that cannot be neatly categorized as pro-Western or anti-China. Economic ties further reinforce this perception. China is Vietnam's largest trading partner, with bilateral trade reaching approximately $235 billion in 2024. Chinese foreign direct investment has surged, exceeding $31 billion by early 2025. New projects alone accounted for nearly $5 billion in 2024. From Beijing's perspective, Vietnam is deeply integrated into China's economic orbit and therefore manageable through incentives rather than coercion. A forceful response against Hanoi could backfire. It risks driving Vietnam toward closer security cooperation with the United States and transforming a complex but controllable relationship into an outright strategic rivalry. For now, Beijing appears to be betting that Vietnam's island building will not fundamentally challenge Chinese dominance so long as Hanoi keeps one foot firmly planted in China's sphere of influence. Vietnam's construction spree, however, is only one element of a broader military transformation. In April 2025, Hanoi finalized a $700 million agreement with India to acquire BrahMos supersonic cruise missiles. The deal includes both ground-launched systems and air-launched variants compatible with Vietnam's Su-30 fighter jets. Capable of flying at nearly Mach 3 and striking targets up to 290 kilometers away, the BrahMos represents a major leap in Vietnam's strike capability. With this purchase, Vietnam becomes only the second Asian country after the Philippines to field the missile. Combined with its existing coastal defense systems, the BrahMos significantly enhances Hanoi's ability to deny access to contested waters. Any hostile surface vessel operating near Vietnamese-controlled reefs would face a far more credible threat than in previous years. Additional reports suggest that Vietnam's arms deal with Russia includes advanced electronic warfare systems and mobile ground-based jammers. When paired with the Su-35's long-range sensors and maneuverability, these systems could complicate enemy targeting and reduce the effectiveness of opposing air operations. Taken together, Vietnam's fortified islands, advanced missiles, and upgraded air assets point to a clear strategic logic. Rather than attempting to match China ship for ship or plane for plane, Hanoi is building a layered denial network. Artificial islands serve as unsinkable forward bases, extending radar coverage, missile range, and patrol endurance deep into disputed areas. This approach mirrors China's own strategy, but on a smaller and more selective scale. It is designed not to challenge Beijing directly, but to raise the cost of coercion to unacceptable levels. If China attempts to pressure Vietnam the way it has pressured the Philippines, it would face a far more resilient and dangerous opponent. Interestingly, Vietnam's actions have elicited little protest from other South China Sea claimants. Malaysia, Indonesia, and even the Philippines have largely remained silent. Part of this restraint stems from trust. Few believe Vietnam intends to restrict freedom of navigation or weaponize fishing access the way China has. Another factor is legal complexity. Manila has considered filing a second international arbitration case against Beijing, this time focusing on environmental destruction caused by China's dredging operations. However, Vietnam's own reef modification undermines that argument. When one claimant destroys nearly 10 square kilometers of reef while accusing another of destroying 19, the moral high ground becomes difficult to defend. For now, Southeast Asia looks the other way. But the long-term implications are harder to ignore. If both China and Vietnam operate from fortified artificial islands, other states may eventually conclude that they too must build infrastructure simply to remain relevant. Once that precedent spreads, the South China Sea risks becoming a permanently militarized zone defined not by law, but by concrete and sand. What Vietnam is doing in the Spratly Islands is not an act of defiance for its own sake. It is a calculated attempt to shape facts on the ground faster than diplomacy or international law can respond. In the South China Sea, control is no longer determined by treaties or legal rulings, but by who can maintain a permanent presence. Concrete, runways, ports, and missile platforms matter more than maps. This is why Vietnam's reclamation effort represents a strategic turning point. Hanoi is not trying to evict China from the region, nor is it attempting to dominate the entire sea. Instead, it is aiming to ensure that China cannot dominate it uncontested. By expanding multiple reefs simultaneously, Vietnam complicates any future attempt to roll back its gains. Reversing these changes would require either enormous political capital or direct military confrontation, neither of which Beijing currently seems willing to expend. At the same time, Vietnam is carefully avoiding the mistakes made by others. Unlike the Philippines, Hanoi does not publicly internationalize every confrontation. It rarely invites foreign navies to patrol alongside its coast guard. Its diplomatic language remains restrained, even as construction accelerates. This dual-track approach allows Vietnam to strengthen its position without forcing China into a corner where escalation becomes the only face-saving option. But this strategy carries risks. Artificial islands are not invulnerable. In a high-intensity conflict, they are exposed, static targets. Their value lies not in survivability under full-scale war, but in shaping behavior during peacetime and gray zone competition. They extend patrol ranges, shorten response times, and make harassment more costly. They are tools of deterrence, not fortresses meant to withstand sustained bombardment. The deeper issue is that Vietnam's success may encourage imitation. Once one state proves that large-scale reclamation can proceed without serious consequences, others may follow. The Philippines may feel pressure to expand its own holdings. Malaysia and Indonesia, long cautious, could reconsider their posture. Each new construction project would further normalize militarization and erode the already fragile norms governing the South China Sea. This gradual escalation is precisely what makes the situation dangerous. No single project triggers a crisis. No single reef justifies war. But collectively, they shift the balance of power incrementally until confrontation becomes more likely by default. History shows that conflicts often emerge not from dramatic events, but from the accumulation of small, unchallenged moves. China understands this dynamic well. Its restraint toward Vietnam does not signal weakness, but prioritization. Beijing is choosing its battles, focusing pressure where it believes leverage is greatest and risks are lowest. For now, that means confronting the Philippines while managing Vietnam through economics and diplomacy. But restraint is not the same as acceptance. If Beijing concludes that Hanoi's actions threaten its long-term dominance, its response may simply be delayed, not abandoned. Vietnam, for its part, appears to be racing against time. Every new hectare of land, every completed port, every reinforced runway increases the cost of reversal. Hanoi is betting that by the time China decides to act, the reality on the water will be too entrenched to undo without catastrophic consequences. In the South China Sea, permanence is power. The broader lesson is stark. The region has entered an era where geography itself is being manufactured. Coral reefs are no longer natural features but raw materials. Sovereignty is poured, dredged, and reinforced with steel. What was once open water is becoming fixed territory, and with it, fixed lines of confrontation. Vietnam's island building campaign shows how middle powers can challenge stronger rivals without open conflict. It demonstrates that in modern geopolitics, engineering can be as decisive as diplomacy, and logistics as powerful as ideology. Whether this strategy ultimately stabilizes the South China Sea or accelerates its militarization remains uncertain. What is clear is that the balance is shifting. Quietly, methodically, and without fanfare, Vietnam is reshaping one of the world's most contested regions. And in geopolitics, silence is often the loudest signal of all.